All right, welcome everyone that has joined us into this session on Deep Dive into Schoolyards. In this session, we'll take a look at the concept of greening schoolyards and the benefits that it can bring to communities. We will first hear from Wessel, who will talk about the Amsterdam perspective. He will talk about the Amsterdam Schoolyard initiative to provide school children with a green space to play. He will also talk about how the municipality has made these green spaces accessible outside of regular school hours to create more playgrounds in the city. Then we'll hear from Jaquie and how Cornwall Council is piloting a similar scheme to transform schoolyards from predominantly concreted areas to exciting green spaces. Cornwall was inspired by the work from Amsterdam and is replicating the concept across the council, thanks to funding from Interact Europe. This is a great example about transferability of experience and the many benefits of international learning. All cities have schools and schoolyards, often made with concrete and used exclusively for school activities. Schoolyards have the real potential to be converted into accessible spaces for all, where the community and green assets can be enjoyed. Every place has schools and children that need to play and enjoy green space. This is a project that many municipalities across Europe can replicate. I'm really looking forward to hearing about these schemes and the benefits for health, learning, and many other things for both the children at the schools and the wider communities. As for the rest of the conference, please ask your questions through the Q&A box, as we'll have time for Q&A and discussion at the end of the session. So I'll first now introduce Wessel Haanstra, who works for the municipality of Amsterdam as a project manager of the Amsterdam Initiative for Schoolyards. He and his team are responsible for running a subsidy program for improving and greening schoolyards of local elementary schools. So Wessel, if you're ready for your presentation.
Yes, thank you for the introduction. Hi everyone, as mentioned, my name is Wessel Haanstra and I work for the municipality of Amsterdam. And since 2016, we started a subsidy program, which is actually called the Amsterdam Impulse to Schoolyards. And in the next 15 minutes, I'll explain a bit about how the project works, what we have achieved, and some of the lessons we learned in the past years about making grey schoolyards greener, what works and doesn't work, and I hope you can benefit from this and apply this to your own local setting. I'll just share my screen. All right. Oh yeah, the presentation will be shared afterwards, I think, and this presentation is also recorded, so you can look into it afterwards. And if you have any questions that can't be answered during this session, I'll have my email address at the end of the presentation as well, so feel free to send me an email if you have any further questions. As I mentioned, the Amsterdam Impulse Schoolyards is a subsidy program. So it's for elementary schools in Amsterdam with a grey stone schoolyard that want to redesign it, improve it, and make it greener. I'll first discuss why, I'll abbreviate it now from now on to AIS, just to save some time. I'll first discuss how it was, why it was developed. Then I'll tell you a bit about how the subsidy program works. Then what we achieved in the last couple of years, and then lastly some of the lessons we learned. And at the end of the session, of course, we'll have some time for Q&A. Okay. So why was the AIS developed? What you see here is actually a typical schoolyard in Amsterdam. Lots of stone, not many diverse possibilities to play for the children, rather depressing. And of course, it's the Netherlands, so there's always lots of rain. There's a reason for this. If a school board wants to start a new school, they get funding from the national government for the building And the funding for the building is the same budget as for the schoolyard. So what you often see is that the school board uses all of the budget for a building, and then there's almost no money left for the schoolyard, and well, it ends up looking like this. So, of course, the children can play on this, but in the municipality of Amsterdam, we had the feeling that there is a lot more potential to be gained. And so we developed the program AIS, and with this program, we hope to contribute to 5 themes in order to improve the schoolyards. One of the most important one is to make the schoolyards greener. For each theme, we translated the benefits that we hope to achieve into criteria of the subsidy. So if a school applies for the subsidy, they have to meet the criteria with their new design for the schoolyard that are mentioned here in the middle. So one of the biggest themes is that the schoolyard has to be greener. 25% of the surface has to be added or has to be green if they want to get the subsidy. Of course, we know that there's not a lot of nature around in the city, and some of the city children barely get into contact with nature anymore. So the green also allows teachers to teach children about nature and plants. Well, there's also a lot of scientific evidence that a more green environment helps with concentration for children, and it results in happier children. Another criteria is health. So the new schoolyard has to challenge children to exercise. It has to be smoke-free. Then what I already mentioned is in Amsterdam we have lots of rain, and all the stone squares we also have a water problem. That's if there's excessive rainfall, which happens more and more often, the sewers can't handle it, and some parts of the city flood. So having more green and less stone actually helps to make the city more rainproof. Another criteria which is very important is that one of the demands for the subsidy criteria is that schools make their schoolyard publicly accessible. That's often not the case, and it's a shame because we don't have too much public space available in Amsterdam. And there's not too many playgrounds in general. So with this criteria, we actually get to benefit from the available playgrounds more optimal. And since we asked the schoolyard to become more publicly accessible, we also have a mandatory participation with this to really design the schoolyard together with the neighborhood and everyone who's going to use it. So how does it work? Schools can apply for subsidy. It's a maximum of 70,000 euros, and the applicant adds a minimum of 10,000 euros. We call it the Amsterdam Impulse, since 70,000 or 80,000 euros is often not enough. But it's a starting budget, so we give an impulse. There's not really, we don't look at the size of schoolyards. So often if it's a bigger schoolyard, then school boards have to add more budget themselves. We provide expertise. So we have an expert on rainproof, we have an expert on exercise, we have an expert on what types of green work and don't work. And we advise and check whether the new design of the schoolyard meets these criteria. But the school board itself is responsible for hiring a designer and a contractor to actually implement the design. Just a quick timeline. Each year we have opening in which 15 schools can apply for a subsidy. Schools write the application. Then in the summer we have an advisory committee that ranks the applications, and each year 15 schools will receive a subsidy. Then they receive a first payment to make the design, and the design is checked with an expert group with experts I already mentioned. So we check whether the new design is actually rainproof, whether the whether sufficient green on the new design, and whether it's actually viable green. Well, as all the criteria that you read in the last slide. With this feedback from the expert group, the schools make a final or adjust their design. Then the final design is definite design is again judged by the expert group, and then schools receive the remaining budget, and the contractor releases the design. On average, we say that the moment from actually that they hear whether they have the subsidy till actually opening and having the new schoolyard takes about 1.5 years. So we started in 2016. Thus far, we have over 100 subsidies granted all over the city. 73 of them are already finished, and as I mentioned, we add each schoolyard adds at least 25% green surface, so that already resulted with the 73 finished schoolyards in over 33,000 square meters of green added to the city. And at the end, schools also account for their how they spend the money, but they also write a report on how the children experience the schoolyards, and we get great feedback that children are just much happier, and there's less bullying, children focus more. Some of the benefits I already mentioned. Here's an example about on the left you see a schoolyard on the how it was before the subsidy, and to the right on how it looks now. And then I'll get to some of the lessons we learned. One big lesson is that plants need time and protection to grow, especially on a schoolyard. Children are children, and they're gonna run around, they're gonna pull out plants, of course. So we make sure that there are some areas, do make sure that they are protected, at least for the first 1 or 2 years, and make sure that you use not too young plants that will get crumbled very easily, but give them some protection and time to grow, as you see an example here. We always say that we can only judge whether a new schoolyard has actually worked after, say, 2 to 3 years. Spend time and money on maintenance. That's for the schools are themselves responsible for maintenance, and we always we ask them to make a maintenance plan and to also reserve money for this. And we judge the maintenance plan because having a green schoolyard just it requires a lot of work. But we also see great initiatives of schools that make sort of competition with different classes being responsible for for maintaining different parts of the schoolyard. This really works. The different zones for different age groups. I mean, some children like to play football. We have chill zones. We just make sure that the schoolyard is designed for different purposes that can actually coexist. So if you have very fragile green areas. Don't put them next to your football area because it will be sure to be destroyed. Playground equipment should match the size of the schoolyard. We always see that swings are very responsible, but a swing takes up a lot of space. So if you have a huge schoolyard, sure, you can do it. But if you have a smaller schoolyard, make sure, especially since we want the schoolyard to have or to challenge children to exercise, be smart about which playground equipment you use. Diversifying uses of green. So we distinguish several uses. We have educational green, which children can learn about different smells or about how food grows, for instance. And we have green that children can really walk through, or is more the adventurous green. Make sure that children can experience different types of green, and it's not just one type. Diversify in types of play as well. This is sort of the same thing as I mentioned with the zones, which you see here in the picture on the right side as well. Prepare for extreme weather. As I mentioned, heavy rainfall is becoming more of a problem. So we have lots of solutions of dealing with heavy rainfall, and we actually have a program, Rainproof, in Amsterdam, and we have an expert that checks whether the new design is viable for coping with heavy rainfall, but also coping with extreme heat. What we saw is that actually we had some research, and well, one of the best ways to deal with extreme heat is just have trees that provide shadow. If you want to make a design that works, involve the people that are going to use it. So children, teachers, parents, and the neighborhood. If they feel that they've been involved in the design, they will also feel responsible for maintaining the neighborhood or the schoolyard. And we really see that this is essential if you want to have a beautiful schoolyard some years afterwards. Lastly, include educational vision. That's we ask schools to, when they apply for the subsidy, to really make the schoolyard part of the school program. So we ask them to include an educational vision in which they describe how to use it. Okay, I believe my time is done, so I'll stop sharing my screen.
Great, thank you, Wessel. That was really, really interesting. It's really nice to see these initiatives. Really, I think it's really positive. So now we'll hear from Jaquie and Stenson and about how Cornwall Council are replicating a sort of similar project. Jaquie is a project manager at Cornwall Council, working on the Green School, Our Future and Climate Change planning policies, and in the Planning and Sustainable Department of the Council. So Jaquie, the ground is yours. Oh, you're on mute, Jaquie. Yeah, it wouldn't be an online conference otherwise. So.
True, very true. I found that was very interesting because doing a pilot scheme for our project, and that is following on from the, I'm going to call it AIS because the longer the title is. I'll just get my slides on screen and I'll share those with you now. Can you see those slides as yet?
Not yet.
No, hang on one moment, sorry. Let's try again. My technical ability has gone out of the window this morning.
Oh, I think everyone understands. Any luck? Do you want me to put them up and you tell me to move them?
I think I might have it now. Sorry.
Yeah, no worries.
There we go.
Yeah.
Yes.
Fantastic.
Success.
All right, I'll let you start.
Thank you. So I wanted to talk to you today about our Green Schools, Our Future project. It is in sort of a pretty early stage. Oh, sorry, one moment. I am struggling with my screen at this end now. And it worked perfectly when we obviously did the practice.
It's always like that.
Right, let me start at the beginning. So apologies, let me start from the beginning. So we were inspired, as I said, by the Amsterdam Impulse School Playgrounds programme, and we're seeking to increase green space and enhance resilience by reducing hard surfaces in urban playgrounds. We want to provide usable spaces in schools to support green infrastructure and to help educate young people. We want to get students and the wider community together, talking, thinking and learning from each other, and looking at the devastating effects of climate change and at natural solutions and how they can help, and why it is vital that we protect our plants and animals.
Sorry, Jaquie, your slides are still not up, but I'll put them up. And if you want to give me a hint when you want to move them, does that sound okay?
Yeah, that's absolutely fine. We're on slide 2 now. Apologies. I don't know what's happening.
No worries.
Okay. So Cornwall's a beautiful and predominantly rural county. It's got 329 schools and they have a variety of outside spaces, but the majority have far too much hard standing and concrete. And this doesn't reflect the true nature of Cornwall. Our schools cater for students from age 3 to 18 years, each having different learning needs. And across Cornwall, the need to address climate change is very high on our agenda and has even over the last difficult 18 months or so. We know that the younger generation are really keen to make changes and to look after what's their world. And this project is aiming to help them. We're involving students at each school that we're working with, and we're going to show the right direction can make a massive difference. If we can move to the next slide, please. Okay. The project was named Green Schools Our Future by a student from one of our 3 selected schools. The schools were chosen by our colleagues in our education departments, and we had 13 that responded to our call to take part, and they each needed to explain why they should be involved. Although 13 doesn't seem a very large figure, obviously this was during the difficult times where we were having lockdown and schools were closed and reopened. So it's we thought that was actually quite a good response. The lessons that we learned throughout this project are going to help us create materials that we can roll out to use in other schools as we go on. Each of the 3 schools offers a unique example of how we can adapt their available outside space to improve green infrastructure and to meet their students' needs. All of the schemes are aiming to support mental health and well-being, and they're going to provide hands-on learning with nature. Next slide, please. We kicked off our design and build stage with an ideas day where we called on the expertise of the Eden Project. They're an educational charity based in Cornwall with a massive amount of experience. Unfortunately, COVID restrictions meant that we met later than we'd originally planned, and we had to do this virtually, which meant that they have a lot of on-site solutions that we were going to actually see, so we could have seen their practical solutions firsthand, but unfortunately we had to do a virtual meeting instead. to focus each of the 3 schools that we'd selected and looked at what they'd thought about what they wanted to do, but it gave them sort of it allowed them to hone down what their plan was for each of their schools. It also gave them a reality check to show what's achievable on an incredibly limited budget. Each of the schools will get €5,000 for their build stage, which is not a massive amount of money. So we also looked at additional things that they could do to make more money, and I know a lot of them have involved their parent teachers associations and other local organisations to help them raise additional funds. We wanted them to look at how best to involve the staff, the students, the community, local businesses, and also how to use their captive audience of volunteers who are parents, as we all know. The schools left the session on the day with a firm idea and actually went off to begin finalising their project plans, working. If I can have the next slide, please. So this is an overview of the schools that we're looking at. So we selected 3 schools: Saltash, Bosvigo and Blackwater. Blackwater and Bosvigo are both primary or junior schools running from nursery up to a nursery age of 3 years old up to 11 years old. They're polar opposites in the green space that they have, where Bosvigo has absolutely none, and you'll see by some of the pictures that I show you shortly, while Blackwater already has some interesting outside space and have already started setting up some really good green projects, and they wanted to link this new project into their existing schemes and to add to their outside space. And our other school, Saltash, is a senior school, and that has students from age 11 to 18. And whilst they do have a large outside space, it's mainly concrete, and the area that they wanted to look at is used at the moment is basically a corridor just to go from A to B or to enter the building. So it's somewhere where they feel that they could definitely add value to and greenery to their space. Next slide, please. Right, so this is a picture of Blackwater School, and this is the area that they're planning to do. As I said, they do have some other green space already and a lot of environmental initiatives, but this is just one part, which is an underused and ugly area of the school grounds that they wanted specifically to work on. Okay, next slide, please. So they're adding to their programme of green projects. And existing green spaces. They want to link an existing nature corridor that they've been working on to some polytunnels, and they're particularly wanting to create some additional outside learning space and just to continue. They're a very good example of a school that is working hard to create additional green space and to use it well. And so they're using the students and the staff and the local community to try and to finalise their plans and come up with exactly what they want to do. They have also used a designer. Oops, sorry, apologies. Next slide, please. And some of their ideas include a discovery pod, hidden areas that children can go in and sit in. So they have themed ideas with different planting, linking to existing school projects. They want to attract more wildlife and to provide additional outside teaching space. Next slide, please. This next school is we would class as a city school, although Cornwall only has one city. But as you can see, it is a very grey and it's very grey. There's lots of concrete. There's no greenery at all, unless you count one small tub. So this school, they're restricted in what they can do because they have difficulty with access to their schoolyard as well, and they're also restricted in any changes they can make to their infrastructure due to the rules and regulations that they're held under. If I can, next slide, please. Okay, so as they say, they currently have very little green outside space, and they've enlisted their school science teacher, who is developing ideas for the interactive spaces for them, and their Parents Teachers Association are raising additional funds to add. But at this school, even their sports pitch is AstroTurf. But luckily they do have some access to other parkland in the local area. They're looking at movable greenery, which would be a good solution for a site like this, because it has, as you see in the previous pictures, limited outside space, and they need to be able to remove things to allow access for utility vehicles and other maintenance work on the school. But we do hope that this idea is going to help some other schools across Cornwall and wider, who have similar issues, because they have a very small outside space. But we're working with them to add simple green space that the students can learn from and will get a real use out of. The movable things that they're looking at, they're more affordable, they're practical, and in some areas you just can't remove hard surfaces. So this is something that we're doing, which is to add green space. It's not ideal, but it's a better option. So at Bosfigo School, next slide please, they're opting for a living wall scenario. So they want to build a living wall, but because they're not allowed to attach infrastructure to the buildings that are there, and they also there were concerns raised over damp and things like that. So they're looking at a self-supporting living wall. They're looking at a movable hedge, and they're looking at raised beds that could have something like bark in, or could have water in, and just different things for the children to learn and use throughout the day. Next slide, please. And this is Saltash School, which is the senior school. And the greenhouse looking building, well, it's blue, but the greenhouse, it's an ugly concrete area. And the building that is the centre of that picture is looking at currently used by students who've got special needs. So the plan for the school is to include a sensory garden and seating area that it's going to link that classroom to the outside space, creating additional learning and talking space. And this was particularly something that was requested by the students themselves. Can I have the next slide, please? As I said earlier, it's a high traffic area. It's used more or less as a corridor, but the students themselves wanted to make this into a talking place, and they are actually drawing up plans for this in their lessons. They're also looking at movable walls of plants so that they can create little areas where they can have one-to-one sessions or one-to-one learning. And they've enlisted the help of volunteers from the student body, staff and parents to keep the area maintained going forward. They're looking at doing a mix of planting with highly scented, tactile and colourful plants, and with other areas where there are unscented plants to cater for all the different students. Some students find it more difficult to have highly scented areas, and others obviously find that relaxing. But they're going to have seating amongst all the different planting areas to accommodate the different needs of the students. Next slide, please. This is a very simplified sketch of what they're planning to do. So there will be more to this than meets the eye at the moment, but this is their initial first plan. So they are going to add planting, and they want plants and areas to calm or stimulate students as necessary, and to attract pollinators, insects and other wildlife to the area as well. Next slide, please. So this is our anticipated work schedule. We were slightly delayed by the issues that we've had during the pandemic, but we've managed to keep going. So in our first semester, which was July to December, we ended up with baseline designs and decided how we would intervene with each school. During semester 2, we had our ideas day to kick off the build process, and the schools left with more or less finalised plans of what they were taking back, and they started to go off and select construction partners and confirm details with their students and staff and the community. And then in semester 3, we're planning to complete all the construction, and we'll survey the pupils and the communities just to see how things have worked. We're going to use lessons learned throughout all of this whole scheme to create materials that will be used going forward. If I can have the next slide, please. So COVID-19 and how it's impacted our project. It has had a big impact on the project and our schedule. The lockdowns and school closures and reopenings we've had have made it more difficult to involve all the students. The schools are using this situation as another lesson learned, and what they're going to do is consider what they actually were able to do during this difficult time, and what they would have done in different times, and how they would have been able to involve the students more. So we have condensed our project timeline, but we hope that it's still achievable, although we do have some difficulties in Cornwall at the moment with finding people to do building work, because we've had a bit of a spurt of everybody having building work carried out across Cornwall. If I can move to, I think it's my penultimate slide, which is anticipated results. The aims are supporting Cornwall's aim to be carbon neutral by 2030, improve interaction with nature for students in schools where they don't have that opportunity, improving air quality, learning about and getting schools to own the green space in their schools and in the community, and sharing it with the wider community, and sharing educational resources that we create from the project across Cornwall and beyond. And if I can have my last slide, that's the end of my presentation.
Great, thank you so much, Jaquie. Once again, really nice, really wonderful project, and it's so inspiring to see all these great things happening. So now we have some time for a Q&A. If the people at the audience want to start putting their questions through the Q&A box on the right-hand side of your screen. And Wessel, if you are still around and if you can join us. But I'll start kicking off with a question for you, actually, Wessel, so we can give Jaquie a bit of a breather.
Sure.
I'll talk to you in a second, no worries, Jaquie. So I was just wondering if you could tell us a bit more about the increased access to the schoolyards from the local community and how you've been involving them throughout that process.
Yeah, so it's actually a criteria in the subsidy. So you will only be granted a subsidy if you make your schoolyard publicly accessible. So there are some limits to this. Some of the schoolyards here are only accessible through the building. Then in that case, you make an exception, and it's not a requirement, and you can still apply for the subsidy. But for all other schools, it's mandatory to do so. And also the participation for making the design together with the neighborhood, the teachers and the children is also mandatory. But we have actually colleagues of mine that help schools to organize this participation part. And what we also notice is that there are just a lot of great schoolyard designers that are very experienced in working with children, and they just host great sessions with children and where they can just imagine what their perfect schoolyard would look like, and they make small scale versions of the schoolyard to really make it their schoolyard, which is essential for the success, I'd say.
Great, thank you. And Jaquie, have you had a chance to involve the local community in this process?
The local schools are involving the schools are involving their local communities. We do have a slight difficulty in the county, and the fact that the most schools in England are actually don't have school space that's open to the public. I think we've had issues in the past that mean that it's more difficult to allow the community to use outside space, but we are involving them in the fact that obviously in local schools, a lot of the community are involved anyway, because their children are at that local school. So we are doing what we can, and we're also going to be contacting local businesses as well and asking them if they want to give some support to some of the projects that we're doing. So
Right.
in short, yes.
Yeah. Because Wessel, that's one of the questions from the audience is just exactly what Jaquie explained, that because of security and safety reasons it's hard to get people to come into the schools. Do you have any sort of recommendations or from your experience on how can the school and the local community overcome this?
Yeah, well, as I mentioned, if the schoolyard is really within the school building, then for us it's also not a requirement to be publicly accessible. But what we always advise schools to do, we have in Amsterdam civil servants that function as the local connection between youth and government, and just they connect citizens we have that for every neighborhood, and always they know the neighborhood very well, and we always connect these civil servants to the school to make sure that they have dialogue also with some of the youngsters and other groups that might be using the schoolyards outside of school time, because in some areas vandalism can be a problem, but we ask in the participation part of the project to also have a dialogue with these youngsters and what would you want on the square. So we had some examples of actually having iPhone chargers available on the schoolyard, and just having them feel included as well and not be seen just as a problem can really help to cope with vandalism as well. Although, I mean, sometimes we have seen some bad examples as well, and then you can never prevent it entirely.
Great, thank you for that. We now have another questions about water being designed into schoolyards, and whether that is possible, and if yes, is there an acceptable maximum depth to be set? Because once again, England it's quite risk averse, and there are usually concerns with children and water. I don't know, Jaquie, if you have any sort of experience with that, whether it's something that the schools have considered, and then Wessel, if you want to tell us about your experience with that and how you've dealt with it.
It's not something that we've actually considered on this occasion. Obviously, the budget that we have for the schools is quite limited, so they're concentrating on planting. I know I did mention that one school was thinking of having planters, but which may have water in to attract some bugs and waterborne species, but they will be very they will definitely have to follow all the rules that we have. So yes, and it's not something that we've considered yet, but obviously there are a lot of regulations around the depth of water, and they would need to be followed.
Great, thanks.
Yeah, it's the same in the Netherlands. So we do have some examples of schoolyards that included a small pond, but it would be fenced, and they would just use it only under guidance of a teacher, just to look at the wildlife and stuff. And yeah, that's our experience.
Right, thank you. More on the sort of water theme, someone is asking about messy play and what have parents and teachers felt with, getting involved in the mud and in the water, and how have you found it in that process? Whether you're telling kids, oh, you can spend all the afternoon in the mud and then you come back. How has that been received by parents and teachers?
Yeah,
either you, Wessel?
Very mixed. I mean, we got very enthusiastic reactions, and just parents that are happy that children actually get to experience a bit nature. And I mean, they used to get dirty as well when they were childs, but we also had some negative reactions that their children would get back home with very dirty shoes and clothes. But in general, I think it's positive, and we always tell the parents and schools, I mean, this is part of being a child and part of living. So children should experience this.
Jaquie, do you have any
Yeah,
thoughts
I was going
on that?
Yeah, I think I agree that it will be similar here. I know I don't know in Amsterdam whether they have school uniform for children all the time, but I know as a parent that I would think having somebody coming home mucky in their school uniform and having to clean it every day would be might be a little bit of an issue. But I think it's a really positive thing to aim for. And I know that talking to the head teachers that we've got on the 3 pilot schemes, apart from the senior ones who didn't really, the senior school weren't really that interested in mucky play, but the younger age group, it's definitely, they want to have a hands-on experience for the children. So yeah, I think I'm sure that most of the parents will come round.
Yeah, and there are measures you can take as well. I mean, schools that often just make sure that, and parents, that their children get an extra set of boots at the school, which so they can switch after playtime, and schools that just get a lot of small brooms and put the children to work to tidy up the schoolyard. I mean, it's just being creative as well.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Great. We've also got another question about food growing and whether it's something that's been considered in the schoolyard design, as this makes the community access even more relevant all the year, crop harvesting. Have you got it in any of the schools in Amsterdam? And once again, is Cornwall considering it for their program? Wessel, do you want to go first? Oh, that doesn't matter. Or Jaquie?
I was just going to say that we're considering the schools themselves are looking at planting, and they're considering everything. As I said, we work with the Eden Project, who they're an educational charity in Cornwall, and they have a lot of plants with vegetables and things that you can eat, because I also think that's a really good idea for students to be able to grow it from seed and learn where their food comes from as well. It's another form of education. So I know that the schools, I think first and foremost, they're looking for hardy plants and hardy planting that are going to survive and aren't too difficult to look after. But other than that, I think they would definitely consider having vegetables and fruits and things that they could grow that would. I think that's a brilliant idea.
Yeah, we do have the experience that really growing vegetables requires quite a lot of work. So since teachers are quite busy themselves, we are always a bit wary of, we always warn the schools that it takes a lot of time. So I think you have to need, a neighborhood that really wants to work with the children as well. We do always say you can use trees with edible greens, so like apple or pear trees, they work if you have at least 2 or 3 of them. In Amsterdam, we actually have a separate program on elementary schools. All children of, I think, age 9 to 10 go to, we have 13 school gardens in the city where they actually follow an entire year with 25 classes of growing vegetables themselves.
That's great. I wish I would be there.
It's great fun. Yeah.
Yeah, it sounds like it. So in the UK, school street closures have been quite common due to air pollution and are increasingly popular. Do you see an opportunity to expand the greening of schoolyards to extend into the wider local environment? So let's say, the community sports club and greening that area and any other spaces that are used by especially children, but mostly for the wider community. Wessel, Jaquie, whoever wants to go first.
Yeah, just briefly. I mean, we actually, not to end with sort of a disappointment, but we did some measurements of the effect on air pollution, and that is actually quite minimal. So that's you won't get that effect. You will, of course, get a lot of effect on what I told, the rainproof, just in general, more a green environment, biodiversity. So you do get a lot of environmental benefits, but decreasing air pollution is, well, the effect is limited as far as we know.
Jaquie, any thoughts?
Yeah, I would imagine that it would be pretty similar here, but I know we've got that we have lots of green initiatives going on at the moment anyway. So we have our Forest for Cornwall, which is involving every community, every school, every every spare inch is having a tree planted at the moment. So I think this is something that we're very keen on in Cornwall.
Great. And given that this is a European conference and about learning from each other, what would be the one piece of advice that you'd give to another municipality or local authority to replicate this program, to start it in, in any other place in Europe? Wessel, do you want to start, given that your program is a bit more advanced, and then Jaquie, given that you're still hands-on, tell us about that.
Well, I think Cornwall is a great example. Just start small, start with 1 or 2 schoolyards, learn from that experience. And I mean, if you're starting a new project and you want some more information, feel free to contact us, and we'll help wherever possible.
Great. Jaquie, do you have?
Yeah, I'd agree. I found it very interesting listening to Wessel's presentation today, actually, and I know we're on a much smaller scale, but there were a lot of sort of crossovers and lessons to be learned, because obviously your project is so much further ahead than what we're doing. But start small, and I think give it a go, and I think, because we're looking at the way of doing things as economically as possible. So it's a good way to start. Even areas where there is very little funding available or very little money available, you can do something, and I think that's the main thing that I've got from the start of this project so far.
Thanks, Jaquie. And I know, Jaquie, the program was kind of affected by COVID because you could not progress in your plans. Wessel, did you get stalled in any way due to COVID-19 with progressing with the school's programs, or did you continue ahead?
Oh, you go first.
Sorry, no, carry on. Sorry.
Yeah, we did delay some of the deadlines for some time because schools had other things to worry about, of course. But in the end, we managed to still get 15 subsidies and have another 15 schoolyards. So it worked out. I mean, as with everything in the past 1.5 years, things like participation was, of course, difficult just to make it to do that online. I mean, in some neighborhoods, people are very used to doing it, and in others, not so much. But we ended up with having another 15 schoolyards, so it worked out.
Great, thank you. And you, Jaquie, did you have any?
No, sorry, I did. I mentioned mine, didn't I, in the presentation? I think the main thing that we had was, the schools had a lot of other things that they needed to consider in advance. So it was harder to get involved with them. We haven't been able to go and visit any of the sites as yet. I mean, obviously things are opening back up again, but yeah, I think we were very grateful that the schools who'd asked to take part were able to still give us any time at all during the last year. It's given us it has given a bit of a night, it's been a bit of a headache, but they're now finding more time, and we're hoping to progress, which is why we've had to condense our timeline on the project.
And have you received any increased interest from other schools that you were not involved previously due to sort of COVID and the increased importance of green spaces? Or is this, you haven't really seen a difference?
I think we had initially the schools who wanted to. We could only have 3 schools for the pilot, so we had other schools that did want to get involved, and I think other schools have come forward and spoken to my colleague in education who's working on this with me. To look at how they can be involved. So at the moment, what we're doing is pointing them to some of the other green initiatives we're doing at the moment. But our aim from this project is to roll it out across a wider, to have educational material that comes and a full sort of lessons learned from the project. So the pilots could say to another school, here's a blueprint for getting started and doing what you want to do there. So that is the aim of what we're doing.
Right. Great. That sounds fantastic. We don't have any more questions. We can finish a bit early. We're just 5 minutes early. But for the rest of the audience, we will now take a break and everyone will be back in the main stage at 5:30. Thank you so much to Wessel and Jaquie. Really loved hearing about this. I have done some previous reading before this, but just hearing it's just really, really great. And just, yeah, really encouraging to see this sort of initiatives coming up more and more. So thank you very much. Hopefully we'll get to see each other in real life at some point. And yeah, see you soon.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye.